Hey guys, quick note about the upload schedule. It might be 2 weeks instead of 1 before the last chapter of this comes out, just because the last chapter will be really long, so it's going to take a bit more work to prepare. But I have a bonus video that I'll try to release next week if I can't release the last chapter next week. This is part 35 of the Irrational series. There will be one more chapter after this. 36 will be the last chapter. Full series playlist is linked below in the description. Katsumi Shinso watched Bakugo blast away skyward to go search for a paramedic or hospital. Now or never. He stepped out into the open. Hitoshi. His son's eyes narrowed. He held Eiko in his arms. Katsumi frowned at the bandages. What had happened to you? Hitoshi. He spoke calmly, soothingly. All for One is going to win this war. The best option is to join him. Please, come back to me. Hitoshi's icy expression made Katsumi step back. You have no right to ask that. No right to advise me. Get out of the way. Katsumi winced. Hitoshi, please listen. I want what's best for you, son. I am not your son, Hitoshi snarled, violet flaming in his eyes. You are a stranger to me. Stranger. The word reverberated through his mind. Stranger. All those years, watching from the shadows. Time lost. Time wasted. Katsumi's world crumbled around him as Hitoshi walked away. That was it? That was all? Yes, of course that was all. He'd been deluding himself. He had no relationship with his son. Hitoshi Shinso's point of view. He'd known it would happen eventually, confronting his father. He'd expected to feel more something, anything. But all he felt in that moment was indifference. His world wasn't centered around the person who'd ignored him. It was centered around all the people who had stuck by him and helped him become the person he was now. Amaya, his mom, Aizawa-sensei, and you. Nothing mattered more in this moment than saving you. The destruction taking place was unparalleled. Bridges torn up, skyscrapers leveled, rubble flying around with tornado-force winds, fires in the distance. Each step was getting harder, but he wouldn't give up. He finally had you back in his arms. Suddenly, everything stilled, and Shinso pressed you against a nearby wall to shelter you as everything that had been flying through the sky came crashing down. He looked up to see All for One floating towards him in a cloud of power. Boy, All for One mused, you look familiar. Ah, Katsumi Shinso's son. No need to die then. Put the girl down. Shinso held you tighter. Why should I? That twice traitor must pay with her life. Already, her body is rejecting death and regenerating, healing the fatal wound. Once that's finished, she'll be on her last life, and I can end her. Go to hell, Shinso snarled. All for One's eyes blazed. Childish. With a flick of his wrist, a bolt of power crackled towards Shinso, who rolled out of the way with you. All for One levitated several nearby pieces of rubble and hurtled them towards Shinso like bullets. Too fast to move you out of the way. Hitoshi acted on instinct. He'd seen the trajectory of each one as it accelerated. His body moved without thinking. Shinso gritted his teeth against the pain. A hand covering your head. An arm around your shoulders, his torso shielding you. Not a single one hit you. Pain blossomed from every spot he'd blocked. But he could still move, and as long as he could move, he could protect you. Katsumi's point of view. It was finally sinking in. Hitoshi would never stop trying to protect you. Katsumi had to make a choice. But really, after all the choices he'd made, this one was easy. The first choice he didn't feel conflicted about. The first choice where everything was simple. Hitoshi's point of view. All for One paused as Katsumi stepped in front of him. "Wait, master." As his eyes met All for One's, Katsumi stopped talking and dropped forward onto the ground. Hitoshi stared in confusion. But then he saw the struggle. All for One's closed eyelids twitching, his body spasming, fingers clenching and unclenching. Was his dad doing this? All for One spoke through gritted teeth. "Hitoshi, run. I can't hold him much longer." Hitoshi scooped you up. The wound had stopped bleeding, and your skin had a transparent glow. But he didn't have time to think about it because at that moment, Present Mike sprinted past him, leading a team of heroes in a charge against All for One. Taking advantage of All for One's distraction, Present Mike clamped quirk-dampening cuffs on him. "Katsumi!" All for One howled, but then went back under Katsumi's control, still fighting. The heroes surrounded him, using every moment Katsumi could give them to prepare for a final execution, blades and quirks poised for the killing blow. Mike counted down for them. 3, 2, All for One screamed. A shockwave of power rippled out from him in all directions, knocking the heroes off their feet and disintegrating the quirk-dampening cuffs. Katsumi gave a sudden gasp before passing out. It was Present Mike who got up again, the last barrier between you and All for One. Present Mike who made All for One's ears bleed with a scream. Present Mike who used precisely controlled sound waves to cancel out the waves of power from All for One and minimize damage. And Present Mike was all too human. "One ordinary hero," scoffed All for One, "with a voice quirk. You're either very brave or very stupid." "A bit of both," Mike grinned fiercely. All for One sent a punch of pure energy at him, leaving him sprawled out in a spiderweb cracked dent in the cement. Mike coughed, his broken rib rattling in the sound. "It's amazing how long you lasted," All for One admitted. "But what's the difference? In the end, you lose." "Or so you think," Mike smirked. "But I have something you don't have." Your ears twitched at the high-pitched staticky sound that entered your consciousness. Your eyes slowly opened. "And what is that?" All for One's eyes narrowed. "Friends," Mike muttered, "who are just as stupid and brave as me." A portal spiraled into the air. Shota Aizawa and Oburo Shirakumo stepped out of the swirling mist on either side of Mike. 3 heroes, facing him as a team. "Impossible," All for One stumbled back. "I killed you." Aizawa's crimson glare made All for One's crackling energy cloud vanish. Oburo Shirakumo ran forward. So that's what was under all the mist and lightning. Blue-gray eyes, glinting with the glass shards of the shattered soul he was. His punch was strong enough to knock All for One off his feet and send him sprawling flat on his back. Oburo Shirakumo crouched to meet his eyes with a dangerous grin. "That's for taking my memories." He grabbed him by the collar and punched again, knocking blood from All for One's nose. "That's for what you put Aizawa and Yamada through." He punched again, making All for One see stars. "And that's for the cat." All for One stared up at the sky in a daze. The rest of the heroes had regrouped, and now they swooped in, handcuffing All for One before he could recover. "One pair of quirk-dampening cuffs isn't enough," Tsukauchi warned. "On it," Hawks winked. His quick fingers had already secured dozens of quirk-dampening cuffs around each wrist, clinking delicately like the many bracelets of a 5-year-old playing dress-up. You touched your shoulder. No pain. The wound was gone. You swayed to your feet, and all you could see was Aizawa, standing tiredly, dripping wet. He'd come back. Even though he was just a human, even though he wasn't invincible, he'd come back to you. You ran forward as he turned, not caring about the damp or the smell of ocean salt as you threw your arms around him. He stumbled slightly, startled, then slowly embraced you, his hold tightening as the relief of you being okay sank in. "Impossible," All for One murmured. He watched foggily as Aizawa held you. "I was defeated by an abuse victim, an amnesiac, and a hobo who stopped having dreams and ambitions midway through high school. Broken people." You're wrong. You stepped closer. Careful, Eiko, Aizawa warned, his hand resting on your shoulder. Abuse victim? Amnesiac? Hobo without dreams? You stared into All for One's eyes. That's what we would be if we'd stayed the same. But people are always changing. Broken hearts can heal. Broken lives can heal. Broken dreams can heal. Your failure to see that is the reason you lost. You felt Aizawa's warm hand on your shoulder, his dreams, strong as ever, riding on you. You felt Obara Shirakumo's presence, familiar to you from a time before you could remember, reclaiming his identity and life. And you felt the spiderweb cracks of your once broken heart filling with warmth and love for all the people who had rescued you from a nightmare of abuse and showed you a brighter future. Every day, it was easier. Every day, you were letting go of the past. All for One's eyes darted between the three of you with the fear of a cornered animal. No, once broken, always broken. Aizawa stared down at him tiredly. Your reasoning isn't rational. Keep telling yourself you can't heal, Shirakumo observed, and you won't. All for One looked at you desperately, almost pleading. The only way forward is destruction. Healing was never an option. You can keep denying it, you replied, but you know you've just been running away. The fight went out of All for One as he stared at you. Running away? Yes, that's exactly how he'd felt for the last century. Running away from something within himself and blaming the world for it. And now he had to face the horror of how he'd done this to himself. But even as a tidal wave of despair crashed over him, deep down there was the faintest flicker of relief, maybe even hope. Because finally he'd stopped running. A startling roar made them all turn towards the sight of Tomura Shigaraki charging at them. Get away from my master! He shrieked, putting his hands to the ground and shattering concrete out in a shockwave. All for One stared in befuddlement. Didn't Tomura see that he was outnumbered? Already, the shockwave of destruction had come to a halt as Eraserhead leveled a glowing red glower at Tomura. And yet Tomura wasn't giving up, continuing to run forward. To rescue him. Somehow, in his web of lies and manipulation, he had gained one person who genuinely cared about him. A person who was willing to risk his life to save him. It hit All for One all at once. Heroes were real. Tomura, his voice wavered. Stop. Run away if you want, but I've made my choice. If you break me out of these restraints, I'll just turn myself in again. Tomura punched a hero out of the way with a snarl. What are you talking about? You wouldn't give up so easily. Believe me, Tomura, All for One sighed. This is neither easy nor is it giving up. I have a hard road ahead. I don't understand a single word you're saying, Tomura roared. Why aren't you fighting? Free yourself. Run away, Tomura. Never! Tomura's voice caught. He fought desperately. Never! I will never leave you, master! He howled as the number of attackers began to overwhelm him. He went down under a tackle of several heroes, fighting with maniacal strength even once they got the quirk-dampening cuffs on him. They dragged him over to sit next to All for One, panting and bruised. Tomura, All for One murmured, you will be my successor. Successor? Tomura laughed bitterly. Of what? Of everything I can give you, now that I've stopped running. Your point of view. Aizawa tilted his face to the sky and applied eye drops to each eye. You knelt next to Uncle Mike, concerned at the pain tightening his facial features on every shallow breath in. Broken rib? Probably a few, he muttered, eyelids fluttering. An ambulance wove through the rubble and screeched to a halt next to them. Aizawa efficiently assisted in getting Mike onto a stretcher, leaning over him anxiously. Hey, Sho, Mike slurred, almost delirious with pain. I protected the kid. Wanted to be there for you. You were there for me, Mike. Thank you. Mike's features relaxed. A drop of ocean water fell from Aizawa's hair and landed on Mike's face. Mike frowned, eyebrows furrowing. "Sho, why are you dripping wet?" You laughed at Aizawa's disconcerted expression. Shirakumo slung an arm around Aizawa's shoulders as Aizawa tiredly began to wring out his hair. "He's always forgetting his umbrella or needing someone to pull him out of the ocean, Yamada. Good thing he has reliable friends like us." The doors of the ambulance closed, and it wove away, lights flashing. Inconveniently, the shapeshift feeling began to come over you. "Dad?" you started, and his eyes flashed red. But for once, erasure didn't make the feeling go away. Aizawa could see the rising panic in your expression, and was in front of you in an instant, holding your shoulders as his gaze flickered over your features intently, trying to see what was wrong. The tips of your fingers tingled. You raised a hand to study it, and were surprised to see that it was glowing, almost translucent with light, near the fingertips. Aizawa's eyes widened. The world seemed to spin dizzyingly, and sounds came from far away. Aizawa was holding you. "She's on her last life." That sounded like Katsumi's voice. "But I can save her." Hi guys! The next chapter will be the final chapter, and it will be extra long, because I don't want to break it into 2 parts. The last chapter will show how Shinso and Bakugo became friends, and will show which one Eiko ends up falling for. It will also have lots of father-daughter moments, because this is, after all, an Aizawa X-Listener story. Finishing this story is a bit bittersweet. I hope that the themes and messages of this story shine through and make you feel something true. Stories have done that for me, and creating stories that do that for other people is what inspires me to write. So if while listening to this story, you ever felt a sense of being loved, or a sense of hope, or a sense of wanting to be like your heroes, then hang on to those feelings. The story is fictional, but those feelings are true. You are loved, there is hope for you, and you can become as selfless and heroic as any of your heroes. That's my philosophy. I hope you all have an amazing week. Look forward to the final chapter, as well as the future stories I have planned for this channel.